Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about endotherms and ectotherms. So let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right to it. Now when we're talking endotherms and ectotherms, right off the bat we want to establish who is who. Okay, an endotherm is an organism that regulates its temperature on the inside. It does it itself. That's us. Okay, that 97.6, which is what you always hear. It's kind of the general average temperature that a human likes to be. But mammals, birds, okay, those are endotherms. Ectotherms, okay, ectotherms are organisms that their internal temperature is managed by their environment. So you can have a desert insect, you can have an insect that lives here, um, but also fish, amphibians, reptiles. I mean that's why the reptiles sun themselves to get warmed up. If you see one out in the summertime or spring, or you go to the pet store and you buy a snake or a lizard, you got to get that sun lamp to make sure they stay as warm as they want to be. All right, some other general guidelines that you want to think about when you think about ectotherms and endotherms is that ectotherms are a little more tolerant of wide gradient on their internal temperature. It's not that they can handle it. Like for example, if our internal temperature gets down to a 95 or 94, I mean we could have serious health complications. And if you get that fever and you get up to that, you get above 100 for a set amount of hours, man, they want you to go to the ER. They want you to get to the doctor and get that looked at. And that's just a range of a 93 to a 101. That's just a range of 8 degrees. But if you think about an insect, okay, today it's going to be in the mid 80s and tonight in the 70s. But an insect could be just fine, in the 60s. So it could be 101, it could be 61, and they're somewhat going to be okay. But we couldn't. If we got down to 6 degrees, we'd probably no longer living. So yeah, they can have a much greater range of internal temperatures. Ectotherms typically are just as warm as their environment is. That's why snakes, they're not out in the wintertime. Okay, it's just too cold to be operating for them, digestion-wise, motion-wise, body function-wise. That's why you'll see them in the spring and summer, but not in the wintertime. Excuse me. And even once summer gets here, once summer is around, reptiles like that, they can, if it gets super hot and super dry, I mean they can change their behaviors to where they're out at night and not so much during the day. So another way that they can solve that. Let's see. Yeah, endotherms, us. I mean, when it comes to not body temperature wise, but heat, just the heat that we're in. If we're a little cold, okay, our bodies can do things to generate heat short term. Shivering, or we can go out, and rake the yard and get warmed up, that kind of stuff. But long term, if an endotherm is in a cold environment, it can do things, like fat as insulation is one thing that it can do. Animals that are in those colder environments can develop thicker fur. I mean, around here, dogs and cats, I mean, you get a summer You get fur, winter fur, summer fur, where they're just shedding like crazy, and it's not so much that they're getting a summer fur or something like that, but they're shedding their winter fur. I mean, you can take our lab, and you could probably brush, comb her, whatever you want to call it, 4 or 5 times a day, and get a pretty good brush full every time. You're just shedding all the time when it comes to the heat. Cat the same way. You can't even pet them without getting a handful of clump of hair during those times. But that's some things that different organisms, different types can do to work with those situations. And we're going to get into the homeostasis process later on in the final video, where we'll talk more about that kind of stuff. But the way we do it, endothermy, the regulation of temperature on the inside, that's a much more costly cellular-wise process. A snake doesn't do anything to change its temperature. If it's too cold, it just gets in the sun. If it's too warm, it just gets in the shade. So there's no real cost. But for us to maintain our 97.6, that costs a lot of energy. Your metabolic rate is part of that, and so it's just a more costly process. And then the last thing to talk about for endotherms, ectotherms, we're talking ectotherms here. I mean, we can do it. We don't regulate our internal temperature, but we can certainly feel the radiation, direct sunlight. I know when I'm either on a walk or I'm mowing, working outside, whatever, grilling, even something like that. If the sun has got a direct line to me, I mean, that's a lot warmer process than when I'm just in the shade. So I can go get in the shade. It doesn't affect my internal temperature any. But for a lizard, as you can see there on the rock, when it's in the direct radiation, if it's a cool morning, okay, it's going to enjoy that, getting warmed up, getting the muscles activated, getting all the processes going. And then when you think of the other types of way to heat, okay, you can think of convection. If you got a convection oven, this is the way it works. The air gets warmed up, and so it rises, and then as it gets away from the heat source, it cools, and so it falls back down, making that little circular cycle. And you can see this. If you want to see this, you get you a pan and put some water in there, a good amount of water, and put it on the stove, turn that burner on, and then put a ping pong ball in there. And you'll see eventually, as the water starts to boil, you'll see that ping pong ball go in a circular motion. And in that process, that's convection. You also feel that in a breeze. The wind's the same way. When it warms up, it starts to rise. That's what creates the wind that you feel. And as it rises, as it starts to cool, it falls back down, generating that wind. And so when you feel wind, earth science time here, that's just a temperature difference between the areas that, in the areas. So if the wind's, if it's hot, and then there's wherever the winds are coming from, it's cooler, you get a much brisker, more fast-paced wind than on a summer day. That's why there's not much breeze in the summertime, because it's warm everywhere. There's no big temperature difference between the two areas to generate a lot of wind, but spring and fall can generate some good amounts of winds. That's convection. Evaporation, we're well aware of. When air warms, when water warms, it can change to a gas and evaporate out. And of course, then conduction, which is what the main things that reptiles do, where the rock is heated up by the sun, and then they can lay on that rock and get warmed up. You feel the same thing as a kid when you go to a swimming pool, in the city swimming pool, and you determine where your stuff is going to be, and then you've got to get from there to the water. And a lot of times you take off your shoes or whatever, flip-flop sandals, whatever you got on, and make your way across that concrete, which can be very, very warm, and in some cases, if it's direct sunlight and it's hot, it can be very, very hot. That's conduction as well. So that's our video over endotherms and ectotherms. When we come back together next time, we're going to be talking about cells. So we'll see you then.